They say twins share everything: a womb, a bond, a soul. But Morgana and Seraphina Thornwood only shared one thing: a burning desire to be rid of their cursed little sister. The needle pierced Elena's thumb for the third time that hour. She hissed through her teeth, watching a bead of crimson bloom against her pale skin before she wiped it away on her apron. The bloodstain joined a constellation of others, rust-colored ghosts of countless evenings spent mending gowns that weren't hers, stitching dreams she'd never be allowed to wear. Candlelight flickered across the cramped attic room, casting dancing shadows on the sloped ceiling that forced her to duck whenever she stood. The Thornwood estate boasted 47 chambers. Elena had counted them once, during one of her midnight wanderings when the rest of the pack slept. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, tapestries worth more than most wolves earned in a lifetime. And then there was this: a converted storage space with a straw mattress, a wash basin with a crack down its center, and a window so small she could barely squeeze her arm through to feel the rain. She pulled another stitch through Morgana's torn ball gown, emerald silk that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe combined. Her sister had ripped it accidentally during sword practice, the same sword practice Elena was forbidden from attending. "You'd only slow them down," her father had said years ago, when she dared to ask. "An omega with a dormant wolf? You'd be dead before the first drill ended." The memory still burned. Elena could feel her wolf, a faint stirring in her chest, like something dreaming just beneath the surface of a frozen lake. She'd felt it her entire life, a presence, a whisper of power that never quite materialized. 22 years of reaching for something that refused to reach back. The midwife's scream echoed through her mind, as it did every time she looked in the mirror. Her mother had loved telling this story at dinner parties, voice dripping with theatrical horror. Born under a blood moon, can you imagine? The omens were terrible. Lightning struck the chapel at the exact moment she crowned, and when the midwife saw her, silver hair, silver eyes, like something from the old curses, she nearly dropped the child. Nearly dropped her. The guests would gasp appropriately. Her sisters would exchange knowing looks, and Elena would sit at the far end of the table, silver hair braided tight against her skull, trying to make herself as small as possible. Laughter erupted from somewhere below, shattering her thoughts. Morgana's laugh, sharp and crystalline, like breaking glass, and Seraphina's lower, more dangerous. The twins were 24, golden-haired and golden-eyed, both full alphas who'd shifted at 13. Everything Elena wasn't. "Can you believe she thought we'd actually—" Their voices drifted up through the floorboards, words indistinct but tone unmistakable. They were planning something. They always were. Elena's fingers tightened on the needle. "Elena, now!" Morgana's summons cracked through the estate like a whip. Elena set aside the half-mended gown, her back protesting as she rose. The attic stairs groaned beneath her feet. She'd learned exactly which ones creaked loudest and avoided those when she didn't want to be heard. Tonight, she wasn't hiding. Morgana's chambers occupied the estate's east wing, a suite of rooms larger than some pack houses, decorated in gold leaf and imported silks. When Elena entered, her sister was seated at her vanity, examining her reflection with the intensity of a general studying battle maps. "My hair," Morgana said, without turning, "the updo for tomorrow's negotiations. Practice it." Elena crossed the room silently, years of servitude making her movements automatic. She gathered Morgana's golden waves, so different from her own silver strands, and began to braid. In the corner, Seraphina polished her ceremonial sword, the blade catching light with each methodical stroke. She was the warrior twin, muscles coiled beneath elegant clothes, always ready for violence. Morgana was the schemer, the one who wielded words like Serafina wielded steel. Together, they were unstoppable. Elena was just stopped. 3 generations, Morgana murmured, watching Elena's hands in the mirror. That's how long we've been fighting those Shadowfang animals. Did you know that, little sister? Elena knew, everyone knew. The war between Thornwood Pack and Shadowfang Pack had become legend. A blood feud that had claimed thousands of lives, bankrupted territories, and left the scars across the entire northern region. I've heard the stories, Elena said carefully. Stories. Serafina snorted, never looking up from her blade. Father lost 3 brothers to those monsters. We lost our mother to grief. And for what? Land neither side can afford to farm anymore. The negotiations tomorrow, Morgana continued, tilting her head as Elena wove pearls through her braids. They're important, historic even. The Shadowfang Alpha has agreed to discuss terms. That's good news, Elena ventured. The twins exchanged a glance Elena couldn't read. At least your hair makes a good reflection for my mirror, sister. Morgana smiled, cold and beautiful. It's the only use for it. Elena's fingers didn't falter. She'd learned long ago not to react, but something in the corner of her vision snagged her attention. A letter on the vanity, sealed with black wax stamped with a wolf skull. The Shadowfang crest. Why would her sisters have personal correspondence with their sworn enemies? You can go. Morgana waved a dismissive hand. And finish that gown before dawn, or I'll have you sleep in the kennels. Elena withdrew, questions burning on her tongue. She swallowed them all. Sleep wouldn't come. Elena lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. The half-mended gown finally complete and draped over her. Single chair. The candle had burned to a stub hours ago, leaving her in darkness that matched the dread coiling in her stomach. Voices. She heard them again. Morgana and Serafina speaking in the study directly below her room. Elena held her breath. Sound traveled strangely in the old estate. If she pressed her ear to the floor vent, Alpha Darius was quite specific. Morgana's voice, businesslike. He needs a blood sacrifice to break his family's curse. Someone of noble birth, unmarked by pack politics. And in exchange, Serafina. The war ends immediately. He recognizes us as the diplomatic heroes who brokered peace. We gain status, resources, and freedom from that creature in the attic. Ice flooded Elena's veins. The moon's bane has kept her docile this long. Serafina sounded thoughtful. But if anyone discovers what we've been putting in her tea, they won't. We've been careful. 17 years of careful. She actually believes she's defective, that the goddess rejected her. Morgana laughed, and the sound was nothing like crystal now. It was poison. Cursed, she calls herself, as if we didn't make her that way. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, barely stifling a sob. Moonsbane. Her sisters had been poisoning her for 17 years. The tea she drank every morning, bitter but supposedly medicinal. All this time. She's not our sister. Serafina's voice hardened. She's our shame. The prophecy dies with her. The Shadowfang escorts arrived tomorrow at dawn. Morgana's tone shifted to something almost gleeful. By the Blood Moon Festival, the cursed Omega will be ash, and we'll finally be free. Elena backed away from the vent, her hand pressed so tight against her lips she could taste blood. Less than 12 hours. She had less than 12 hours before her own sisters sold her to their enemies, to be sacrificed for a curse she'd never heard of. to end a war she'd never fought in. And she had nowhere to run. Below, Morgana laughed again. "Sweet dreams, little sister, enjoy your last ones." Elena didn't sleep that night. She planned. Dawn came like a funeral procession, slow, gray, and heavy with unspoken endings. Elena lay perfectly still as her bedroom door creaked open, her breathing measured and deep, every muscle in her body screaming to run. She'd spent the night planning escape routes, testing the attic window, even considering the servants' passages that wound through the estate's bones like secret arteries. Every option ended the same way, caught, punished, and sold anyway. So she'd made a different choice. She would watch, she would wait, and when the moment came, she would be ready. "Elena, sweet sister?" Morgana's voice dripped honey laced with arsenic. "Are you awake?" Elena stirred, feigning grogginess as she sat up. Both twins stood in her doorway, dressed in formal diplomatic attire. Morgana in deep burgundy, Serafina in military blacks. They looked like they were attending a state funeral. Mine, Elena thought bitterly. They're dressed for mine. "We have wonderful news." Morgana swept into the cramped space, wrinkling her nose at the humble surroundings, as if she hadn't condemned Elena to them. "We've arranged a healing retreat for you. A specialist in the Shadowfang territory has experience with conditions like yours." "Shadowfang?" Elena let fear creep into her voice, not difficult since terror was already clawing at her chest. "But there are enemies." "Were," Serafina corrected, leaning against the doorframe with practiced casualness. "The negotiations have progressed beautifully. There's a ceasefire. You'll be perfectly safe." Safe. The word tasted like ash. "I've taken the liberty of selecting your travel clothes." Morgana gestured, and a servant Elena didn't recognize appeared with a white gown draped over her arms. Simple, elegant, the kind of dress one might wear to a wedding or a sacrifice. Elena's throat tightened, but she nodded meekly, accepting the gown with trembling fingers that weren't entirely performative. As she dressed behind a shabby privacy screen, she heard her sisters whispering, probably congratulating themselves on their flawless performance. 17 years. They'd been planning this for 17 years, poisoning her tea, suppressing whatever power she might have possessed, shaping her into the perfect victim, weak, isolated, and convinced of her own worthlessness. Not anymore, something whispered inside her, something that felt almost like a growl. When she emerged, Morgana pressed a familiar cup into her hands. "Your morning tea, for the journey." Elena stared at the amber liquid, remembering every bitter sip she'd ever taken. Every morning she'd thanked her sisters for caring about her health. The moon, Spain's distinctive undertone. She recognized it now, masked beneath chamomile and honey. She raised the cup to her lips, tilted it back, and let the liquid stream down her chin and into her collar instead of her throat. A slight cough, a clumsy dab with her sleeve, and the evidence was hidden. "Nervous?" she murmured apologetically. Morgana's smile didn't waver. "Understandable. Come, the escorts are waiting." Their father didn't come to say goodbye. Elena hadn't expected him to. Lord Thornwood had barely acknowledged her existence in 22 years, but some small foolish part of her heart had hoped. That hope died as they descended the grand staircase and passed his study, door firmly closed, no sound from within. She was nothing to him, she always had been. The morning air bit cold against Elena's skin as they crossed the estate's courtyard toward the border road. And there, waiting like shadows given form, stood the Shadowfang warriors. They were massive, scarred, and brutal-looking, dressed in black leather armor that absorbed the weak morning light. At their head stood a wolf with cruel eyes and a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw. Commander Kao, she assumed, though no introductions were made, because you don't introduce livestock to the slaughterhouse workers. The exchange happened with clinical efficiency. A chest of gold changed hands, followed by a rolled treaty bearing both pack seals. Elena watched her sisters accept payment for her life with the same expressions they'd wear while purchasing new gowns. "Don't fight them, Elena." Serafina's mask slipped for just a moment, something almost like guilt flickering in her golden eyes. "It'll only make it worse." Elena said nothing. What was there to say? Silver cuffs closed around her wrists, and she bit back a scream as the metal seared her flesh. Silver sensitivity, another thing she'd apparently possessed all along, hidden beneath the Moonsbane's suppression. The warriors loaded her into a prison wagon with bars instead of windows, and as the wheels began to turn, Helena watched the Thornwood estate shrink into the distance. She didn't cry. She'd wasted too many tears on people who would sell her soul for political convenience. The journey through Shadowfang territory revealed the war's true cost. Burned villages, mass graves, fields lying fallow where farmers had died or fled. 3 generations of hatred had bled both packs nearly dry. A young girl watched the wagon pass, her face gaunt with hunger. "The sacrifice," she whispered, eyes wide, so they knew. The whole pack knew what she was being brought here for. The Shadowfang dungeons were cold, dark, and reeked of despair. Helena was thrown into a cell with stone walls that wept moisture and chains bolted to the floor. As the guard's footsteps faded, she finally allowed herself to shake. "You're new." The voice came from the adjacent cell. An old woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair peered at Elena through the bars. "I'm Mira, healer, jailed for opposing the blood rituals." She paused. "Let me see your shoulder." "My shoulder?" "The mark. I saw it when they dragged you past." Confused, Elena shifted her torn gown to reveal her shoulder blade, and gasped. A mark she'd never noticed before was glowing, faint silver light pulsing like a heartbeat. Mira's weathered face went pale. "Moon's mercy. You're the Luna Reborn." "The what?" "The prophecy. Once every 1,000 years, a silver wolf is born who can unite or destroy all packs." Mira gripped the bars between them. "Your curse isn't a curse at all, child. It's divine power. The Moonsbane kept you dormant, kept you from discovering the truth." Elena's mind reeled. Everything she'd believed about herself shattered in seconds. Above them, drums began to beat, deep, rhythmic, hungry. The Blood Moon Festival had begun. "The Alpha King arrives tonight for peace negotiations," Myra said urgently. "Tony Gardner. If anyone can save you, it's him, but he's never met his fated mate, and fate is cruel with timing." Elena barely heard her. Something else had captured her attention. A scent on the wind, drifting down through the dungeon's cracks. Cedarwood and steel, wild and powerful. Someone had entered Shadowfang territory, and for reasons she couldn't explain, her mark burned brighter in response. Elena is safe in Tony's arms, for now. But Darius won't stop. Her sisters are still out there, and she hasn't even discovered her true power yet. The real story is just beginning. If you're already hooked, do me a favor. Drop A in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this story has traveled. New York, London, Toronto, Cape Town, let me know. And if you don't want to miss Elena's awakening, hit that subscribe button right now. Now, let's begin. Tony Gardner had forgotten what hope felt like. 10 years of war. 10 years of watching his wolves die on battlefields that solved nothing, signing death notifications for soldiers who would never return home, and carrying the weight of a kingdom that demanded everything and offered nothing in return. His body was a map of violence, claw marks across his chest, a sword scar bisecting his left eyebrow, burns on his forearms from a wolfsbane ambush that had nearly claimed his life. He was 32 years old and felt ancient. The armored convoy rumbled through Shadowfang territory, and Tony stared out the window without seeing the devastation rolling past. His beta, Marcus, sat across from him reviewing diplomatic briefs, but the words were meaningless noise. Peace negotiations, treaty terms, border agreements, all of it ash in his mouth. "You should eat something," Marcus said without looking up. "You've been running on fumes for 3 days. I'll eat when there's something worth celebrating. Pessimist. Realist." The convoy slowed as they approached the Shadowfang border checkpoint, and Tony straightened in his seat, preparing to don the mask of the Alpha King, cold, calculating, untouchable. It was the only way he'd survived this long. Feel nothing, want nothing, expect nothing. Then he crossed the territory line. The scent hit him like a thunderclap. Wild roses and moonlight. Sweetness laced with power. Something ancient and sacred in his in a way nothing had ever been his before. Tony's wolf, dormant for years, exhausted by war and grief, erupted inside his chest with a force that nearly stopped his heart. The beast surged against his control, clawing toward the surface, driven by a single word that echoed through every fiber of his being. Mate. "Tony?" Marcus looked up sharply. "What's wrong?" Tony couldn't answer. His eyes flashed gold, his claws extended involuntarily, and every muscle in his body screamed at him to shift, to hunt, to find her. He hadn't felt his wolf this strongly in a decade. He'd thought that part of him had died on the battlefield alongside his hope. But she was here. His fated mate was here, somewhere in this goddess-forsaken territory, and every second that passed without her in his arms felt like slow suffocation. "Is there a female here?" His voice came out barely human. A growl wrapped in words. "Silver hair, young." Marcus's eyes widened. "Tony, you can't be serious. Is there a female?" "I don't. We'd need to ask Darius." The convoy stopped. Alpha Darius of Shadowfang stood waiting at the fortress gates, surrounded by his personal guard, a diplomat's smile plastered across his weathered face. He was older than Tony by 2 decades, his dark hair streaked with gray, his eyes carrying the hollow look of a man haunted by something worse than war. Tony barely registered any of it. The scent was stronger here, coming from below, underground, beneath a stone and iron, trapped somewhere she shouldn't be. "Alpha King." Darius extended his hand. "Welcome to Shadowfang. We're honored to host these historic negotiations." Tony ignored the hand. "You have a prisoner, silver-haired. Where is she?" Darius's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "Only servants and prisoners of no consequence, Your Majesty. Surely the Alpha King hasn't traveled all this way to discuss dungeon inventory." Liar. Tony's wolf snarled the accusation, and it took every ounce of his legendary control not to tear the man's throat out on the spot. "We'll discuss the negotiations after I've rested. Provide quarters." Something dark flickered in Darius's eyes. Desperation, perhaps, or the particular madness that Tony had heard rumors about. The Shadowfang curse. Every alpha in their line eventually descended into violence and paranoia. Darius was clearly fighting it, but for how much longer? None of it mattered. Only she mattered. "Hold on," Tony thought fiercely. sending the words into the void and hoping somehow she could hear them. "I'm coming for you." Elena couldn't stop shaking. They'd dragged her from her cell an hour ago, stripped her of the travel gown, and forced her into a bath that smelled of ritual herbs and funeral oils. Now she stood in white ceremonial robes, pure and virginal and utterly transparent in its meaning, while priestesses painted symbols on her forehead and wrists. The courtyard was packed with Shadowfang wolves, hundreds of them gathered beneath the rising blood moon, their eyes reflecting crimson light. They watched her with a mixture of hope and hunger that made her skin crawl. She was their salvation, their sacrifice, the lamb that would wash away generations of cursed blood. "You should be honored," Alpha Darius said, approaching the stone altar where she'd been chained. He carried a ceremonial dagger, pure silver, ancient, its blade etched with prayers to gods Elena didn't recognize. "Your death will save my entire bloodline. I didn't volunteer for this honor." The words escaped before she could stop them, sharper than she'd intended. Darius's expression didn't change. "Neither did my grandfather when the madness first took him. Neither did my father when he slaughtered his own beta in a paranoid rage. Neither did I when the whispers started." He leaned close, and Elena saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't cruel, not really. He was terrified. "The curse will take me soon. I feel it every day, scratching at my sanity. Your divine blood is the only thing that can stop it. There has to be another way. There isn't." He straightened, raising the dagger toward the blood moon. "May the goddess accept this offering and cleanse the sins of my fathers." Elena closed her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. 22 years of suffering, and this was how it ended, alone, afraid, murdered by strangers for a curse she had no part in. "I'm sorry," she thought, though she didn't know who she was apologizing to. Her mother, maybe, who had died giving birth to her cursed daughter. The wolf inside her that had never been allowed to wake. The life she might have lived if things had been different. The dagger began its descent. And then the world shattered. A roar, unlike anything Elena had ever heard, tore through the courtyard. Primal, furious, carrying an alpha command so powerful that every wolf in attendance dropped to their knees. Darius stumbled, the dagger clattering from his grip. Guards reached for weapons they suddenly couldn't lift. Elena's eyes flew open. He came through the crowd like a force of nature, half-shifted and terrible, claws extended and eyes blazing molten gold. He was massive, easily the largest wolf she'd ever seen in human form, with dark hair wild around a face carved from violence and shadows. Scars crossed his features like battle maps, and his presence pressed against her senses with an authority that made her bones ache. Mine. The word wasn't spoken, it was unleashed, a declaration that rewrote reality itself. He reached the altar in 3 strides and ripped her chains from the stone with his bare hands, metal shrieking in protest. Steam rose from where the silver touched his palms, but he didn't seem to notice or care. His focus was entirely on her, those burning gold eyes searching her face with an intensity that stole her breath. "She is my mate." His voice dropped to something deadly calm as he addressed Darius, who was struggling to rise. "Sacred law of fated mates, she belongs to me. Any who touch her die by my hand." The crowd remained frozen. Even Darius didn't argue, couldn't argue perhaps. The sacred law was older than any pact, older than any treaty. Fated mates were gifts from the moon goddess herself, and to interfere with the bond was to invite divine wrath. Warm fabric settled over Elena's shoulders. His cloak, she realized, carrying that intoxicating scent of cedarwood and steel. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features, the weight of responsibility he carried like chains. But his touch, when he cupped her face in his scarred hands, was impossibly gentle. "I've got you," he whispered, and his voice cracked on the words. "No one will hurt you again." Elena's mark blazed to life, silver light burning through the ceremonial robe. Gasps rippled through the crowd as wolves recognized what they were seeing. The mark of the moon goddess, proof of divine blessing, shining like a beacon on the woman their alpha had nearly sacrificed. "Luna Reborn," someone whispered. Tony lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, and Elena found herself clinging to him instinctively, her body recognizing its mate even as her mind struggled to process what was happening. "She comes with me." Tony's command left no room for argument. "The negotiations are over." Darius stepped forward, desperation cracking his diplomatic facade. "You don't understand. The curse, the madness." But Tony was already walking away, his royal guards forming a protective barrier around them. Elena looked over his shoulder at the furious Alpha, at the stunned crowd, at the altar where her blood should have spilled. This wasn't over. She could see it in Darius's eyes. The determination, the desperation, the curse-driven madness beginning to surface. The Shadowfang pack would come for her, and when they did, blood would spill. But for now, wrapped in the arms of a stranger who was somehow hers, breathing in cedarwood and steel, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in 22 years of captivity and cruelty. She felt safe. The armored transport hummed beneath Elena as the Shadowfang fortress disappeared into the distance, swallowed by forest and fog. She sat across from Tony, the Alpha King, her mate, a stranger who had ripped chains from stone to save her, and tried to remember how to breathe. He hadn't stopped watching her since they'd left. Those gold-flecked eyes tracked every shiver, every wince, every micro-expression that crossed her face. It should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like being seen for the first time in her life. "Your wrists." His voice was rough, strained with barely contained fury. "The silver burned you." Elena glanced down at the angry red welts circling her arms, already blistering. She'd almost forgotten the pain and the chaos. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." Before she could protest, Tony crossed the transport and knelt before her, producing a medical kit from beneath the seat. His massive hands that had torn metal like paper, cradled her wrists with devastating gentleness as he applied cooling salve and wrapped clean bandages around the wounds. "I've never had silver sensitivity before," Elena murmured, watching him work. "At least I didn't think I did." "The moonsbane?" His jaw tightened. "It suppressed everything. Your wolf, your abilities, your connection to the bond." He looked up, and the raw pain in his expression stole her breath. "I've been searching for you for 10 years. I felt you out there, somewhere, like a phantom limb, but I could never find you. I didn't know." The words felt inadequate. "I didn't know about any of it. The mate bond, my wolf, the prophecy. Prophecy." Elena hesitated, then explained what Mira had told her in the dungeons. The Luna Reborn, the divine power, the sisters who had poisoned her since childhood to prevent her from discovering the truth. With each word, Tony's expression grew darker, his control visibly fraying at the edges. By the time she finished, his claws had extended again, gouging marks into the transport's leather seats. "Give me their names." His voice was barely human. "Your sisters. I want their names. Tony, they poisoned you. For 17 years, they sold you to be slaughtered." He stood abruptly, pacing the confined space like a caged predator. I have executed wolves for less, far less. I know. Elena rose on unsteady legs, crossing to him before she could second-guess herself. Her hand found his arm, the first time she'd initiated contact, and the effect was immediate. His wolf calmed, his breathing steadied, and those burning eyes softened as they met hers. "You're safe now," she said, echoing his earlier words back to him. "I'm here. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Something cracked in his expression, the wall he'd built around himself, perhaps, the armor of a king who'd forgotten how to be a man. "I gave up," he admitted quietly, "years ago. I thought the goddess had forsaken me, that I was meant to be alone. So did I." They stood there in silence, two broken wolves finding each other against impossible odds, as the transport carried them toward a future neither had dared to imagine. Starfall Palace rose from the mountains like a dream carved in obsidian. Elena pressed her face to the window as they approached, drinking in the sight of towers that pierced the clouds, banners of silver and black snapping in the wind, and gardens that sprawled across terraced cliffs in explosions of color. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was apparently her new home. The palace healers descended the moment they arrived. Dr. Cassian, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes and no tolerance for nonsense, took one look at Elena and whisked her away to the medical wing before Tony could protest. Hours of examinations followed. Blood draws, scans, tests Elena didn't understand. Through it all, Tony remained stationed outside the door, refusing to leave despite Marcus's repeated attempts to drag him to waiting diplomatic emergencies. Finally, Dr. Cassian emerged with a tablet full of results and an expression that made Elena's stomach drop. "The moonsbane saturation in your system is unprecedented," she said bluntly. "This concentration should have killed you within 5 years of initial exposure. The fact that you survived is nothing short of miraculous." "How is that possible?" Tony demanded. "Divine bloodline." Dr. Cassian pulled up Elena's shoulder mark on the display. "The Luna Reborn isn't just a title, it's a biological reality. Her cells are fundamentally different from ordinary wolves. The moonsbane suppressed her abilities, but her body fought the poison constantly, keeping her alive through sheer genetic stubbornness. My sisters," Elena whispered, "they knew. They knew exactly what they were doing. The poisoning began when you were approximately 5 years old, precise enough to suppress your awakening without killing you outright. This was deliberate, sustained, and meticulously planned." Tony's growl shook the walls. "The detox process will be difficult," Dr. Cassian continued, unperturbed. "As the moonsbane leaves your system, your dormant wolf will attempt to emerge. The process typically takes weeks and is extremely painful." "Whatever she needs," Tony said immediately. "The best healers, the best facilities. What she needs is support. The bond between mates can ease the process significantly." Dr. Cassian's stern expression softened slightly. "Stay with her, Your Majesty. Hold her through the worst of it. Your presence will anchor her wolf as it awakens." Helena was moved to the East Wing, royal quarters, she learned, reserved for the Alpha King's family. The rooms were larger than the entire Thornwood attic, filled with soft fabrics and warm light, and windows that overlooked the kingdom she was apparently meant to help rule. She was examining a tapestry depicting ancient wolf legends when the door opened behind her. The woman who entered was stunning, raven-haired, elegantly dressed, moving with the practiced grace of someone born to power. Her smile was perfect. Her eyes were ice. "So, you're the Omega everyone's whispering about." Lady Isadora Blackthorne circled Elena slowly, appraising her like livestock at auction. "How quaint. The Alpha King's fated mate is a cursed little nothing from a minor pack." Elena said nothing. her instincts screaming warnings. I've been Tony's companion for 6 years. Isadora stopped directly in front of her, close enough that Elena could smell her perfume, something floral masking something rotten. I've attended every state function, managed every social obligation, prepared myself to be his queen in all but name. And now you appear from nowhere and expect to take what's mine. I didn't ask for any of this. No, you didn't. Isadora's smile sharpened. The court can be dangerous for those who don't belong, little Omega. Remember that. She swept out as dramatically as she'd entered, leaving Elena alone with the distinct impression that she'd just made a very dangerous enemy. That night, as Elena tossed in her grand new bed, she dreamed of running through moonlit forests with silver fur flowing behind her. Freedom, power, joy. But the dream shifted, darkness creeping in, her sisters conspiring with Darius. Isadora's voice, venomous with hate. The Omega won't survive the detox. I'll make sure of it. Elena woke, gasping, her mark burning against her skin. Something terrible was coming, and she was at the center of it all. The pain came in waves, each one worse than the last. Elena writhed on sweat-soaked sheets as 17 years of moonsbane clawed its way out of her system. Her bones felt like they were splintering and reforming, her blood turning to acid, her skin too tight for the power trying to burst free beneath it. She screamed until her voice broke, then screamed silently, tears streaming down temples that burned with fever. Tony never left her side. Through 3 days of agony, he held her hand, cooled her forehead with damp cloths, and whispered promises she could barely hear through the roaring in her skull. When she thrashed, he pinned her gently to prevent her from hurting herself. When she sobbed, he gathered her against his chest and let her tears soak through his shirt. Fight, Elena. His voice became her lifeline, the only constant in a world dissolving into torment. Fight for us. For the future we'll build together. On the second night, the hallucinations began. She saw herself at 5 years old, accepting a cup of bitter tea from Morgana's smiling hands. At 8, overhearing whispers about the cursed child who should have been drowned at birth. At 12, watching her sisters shift for the first time while she remained trapped in human form, broken and worthless. You were never broken, something growled inside her. They broke you on purpose. The voice was feminine, ancient and furious. It resonated in Elena's chest like a second heartbeat, growing stronger with each wave of poison that left her system. I am Lyra, the voice said. I am your wolf, and I have been waiting 22 years to meet you. Elena sobbed harder, not from pain this time, but from the overwhelming sensation of finally feeling whole. Dr. Cassian monitored her constantly, adjusting IV drips and taking readings that apparently grew more astonishing by the hour. Her wolf is fighting to emerge, she reported to Tony during a brief moment when Elena's fever had broken enough for coherent thought. The power readings are off every scale we have. If she survives this, she'll be extraordinary. If. The word haunted Elena through the third night, when the pain crescendoed to something beyond description, and she genuinely believed she was dying. Then, suddenly, silence. Elena floated in darkness, her body distant and strange, and Lyra curled around her consciousness like a protective flame. Rest now, her wolf murmured. The worst is over. When you wake, we will be one. She slept without dreaming. Isadora moved through the medical wing like a shadow, her soft slippers making no sound on the marble floors. The guards had been easy to distract. A false report of intruders near the eastern gates, delivered by a servant whose family owed Isadora more than they could ever repay. The night staff had rushed to respond, leaving the corridor momentarily unattended. momentarily was all she needed. The vial in her palm contained concentrated moonsbane, enough to overwhelm even a divine bloodline during the vulnerable detox process. Dr. Cassian had explained it herself, hadn't she? Elena's body was fighting to purge the poison. Introducing more at this critical stage would be lethal. Tragic, Isadora thought as she slipped into the darkened room. The cursed Omega's body simply couldn't handle the transition. These things happen. Elena lay motionless on the bed, pale as death. Silver hair spread across the pillow like moonlight on water. An IV drip fed into her arm, the perfect delivery method. No one would ever know. "You're a mistake," Isadora whispered, approaching the IV stand. "A cosmic error that I'm correcting. Tony deserves a true queen, not some broken Omega playing dress-up in borrowed finery." She uncapped the vial. "He would have chosen me eventually. 6 years I've waited. 6 years of perfect patience, perfect performance, making myself indispensable. And then you appear from nowhere with your divine marks and your tragic backstory, and suddenly I'm invisible." The vial tilted toward the IV port. "Goodbye, little Luna. May the goddess have more mercy on you than I do." Elena's eyes snapped open. They blazed pure silver. No pupil, no iris, just endless moonlight pouring from sockets that had held ordinary eyes moments before. A growl ripped from her throat. Not human, not quite wolf. Something other that made the windows rattle in their frames. Isadora stumbled backward, the vial slipping from nerveless fingers. The door exploded inward. Tony crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand closing around Isadora's throat before she could scream. He lifted her off her feet, slamming her against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. "You tried to kill my mate." The words came out guttural, more wolf than man. "I felt her fear through the bond. I felt you threatening her." "Tony, please, I know exactly what you were doing." He squeezed tighter, watching her face turn purple. "I should kill you. Every instinct I have is screaming to end your miserable existence right now." "Don't." Elena's voice was hoarse, strange, layered with Lyra's harmonic undertone. "She's not worth the blood on your hands." Tony held Isadora suspended for an endless moment, then dropped her in a heap on the floor. "You're exiled from court. Your family's holdings are frozen pending investigation. If I see your face again, I'll let Elena's wolf decide your fate." Isadora fled without looking back. The next morning, Elena woke to a different nightmare. Morgana and Serafina stared at her from the television screen mounted on the medical room wall, dressed in elegant morning clothes, tears streaming down their beautiful, treacherous faces. "We beg the Alpha King to return our beloved sister," Morgana sobbed, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Elena was sent as a diplomatic hostage to Shadowfang as part of peace negotiations. She volunteered willingly, and now she's being held against her will by a tyrant who claims divine right over innocent women. Serafina nodded gravely beside her. "We have documentation proving Elena agreed to this arrangement. The Alpha King's actions constitute kidnapping, a violation of pack sovereignty, and an act of war." The news anchor's face reappeared, grave and concerned. "Neighboring packs have expressed alarm at these allegations. Lord Thornwood of the Thornwood Pack is calling for an emergency council meeting to address what he calls unprecedented tyranny from the Crown." Elena stared at the screen, something cold and hard crystallizing in her chest. They were good, her sisters. They'd always been good at manipulation, at crafting narratives, at making themselves the victims while Elena suffered in silence. And now they were doing it on a national stage, painting her rescue as abduction and her mate as a monster. But something had changed during those 3 days of agony. Elena wasn't the silent sufferer anymore. She wasn't the cursed Omega who accepted her fate with bowed head and trembling hands. 17 years of poison had burned out of her system, and in its place, something new had taken root. Lyra stirred in her chest, her wolf's rage matching her own. "They wanted you weak," Lyra growled. "They made you small so they could feel large. But you were never small, Elena. You were a queen in chains. And now the chains are gone." Elena smiled. Not the timid, placating smile she'd worn like armor for 2 decades, but something sharper, hungrier. The smile of a woman who had been sold to death and survived, who had been poisoned since childhood and emerged stronger, who had finally discovered the truth about herself and refused to be silenced any longer. "Call a council meeting," she told Tony, her voice steady as steel. "I have things to say to my sisters, and this time they're going to listen." The grand hall of Starfall Palace had witnessed coronations, declarations of war, and the signing of treaties that shaped the Wolf Kingdoms for centuries. But it had never seen anything like this. Elena stood at the entrance, wrapped in silver armor that had been forged overnight at Tony's command. The metal hugged her frame like a second skin, etched with lunar symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight. Her silver hair flowed loose down her back, no more hiding, no more braiding it tight against her skull to minimize its strangeness. She was done being ashamed of what she was. Hundreds of wolves packed the hall, representing every major pack in the kingdom. They'd come expecting drama, expecting scandal, expecting to witness the downfall of either the Alpha King or the Omega who'd ensnared him. The air crackled with anticipation and barely concealed hostility. And there, at the center of it all, stood Morgana and Seraphina Thornwood. They wore black mourning gowns, their golden hair styled in elaborate updos, their faces masks of dignified grief. The perfect picture of wronged nobility. Elena might have believed it herself once, might have doubted her own memories in the face of their polished performance. Not anymore. "The accused may present their defense," the Grand Arbiter announced, his ancient voice echoing through the chamber. "Lady Morgana, Lady Seraphina, you stand accused of conspiracy, attempted murder, and treason against a divine bloodline. How do you plead?" "Innocent," Morgana said, her voice steady and clear. "We are the victims here, honored Arbiter. Our sister was troubled, confused. We arranged healing treatment for her condition, nothing more. The Alpha King abducted her from legitimate medical care and has clearly manipulated her fragile mind." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some wolves nodded sympathetically. Elena felt Tony tense beside her, his control fraying, but she placed a hand on his arm. "Let me," the gesture said. "This is my battle to fight." "Present your evidence," she said, her voice carrying across the hall with an authority that surprised even herself. Beta Marcus stepped forward, activating a holographic display that materialized above the assembly. Documents cascaded across the projection. Bank records, signed contracts, medical reports. "The bill of sale," he announced, highlighting a parchment bearing the Thornwood seal. "Signed by both accused, selling Elena Thornwood to Alpha Darius of Shadowfang for 10,000 gold pieces and territorial concessions." The crowd's murmuring grew louder. "Forged," Seraphina snapped. "Obviously forged." The gold was deposited in Thornwood accounts 3 days before Elena's transfer. Marcus continued implacably. Bank records confirm the source as Shadowfang Treasury. Additionally, we have testimony from Mira, former healer of Shadowfang, who witnessed the sacrifice preparations and can confirm Elena was brought in chains, not as a willing patient. Mira stepped forward from the crowd. Elena had insisted she be rescued from the dungeons and given sanctuary. The old healer's voice was steady as she described what she'd seen: the altar, the ceremonial dagger, the white robes of sacrifice. "Finally," Marcus said, pulling up medical imagery. Dr. Cassian's analysis of Elena's blood work, showing 17 years of sustained moonsbane poisoning. The concentration levels proved this was deliberate suppression, not accidental exposure. Silence fell over the hall. Even the wolves who'd arrived skeptical were staring at the evidence with dawning horror. Morgana's composure cracked first. "You don't understand. The prophecy said she would destroy us. A Luna Reborn rising in our bloodline would have ended everything we'd built. So you poisoned a child," Elena cut in, stepping forward. "Your 5-year-old sister. You fed her moonsbane every morning for 17 years, watched her suffer, let her believe she was broken and cursed. And when that wasn't enough, you sold her to be butchered on an altar." She removed her cloak, revealing the scars that wrapped her wrists from the silver chains, the faded burn marks on her arms from years of moonsbane exposure. The crowd gasped as they saw the evidence written on her body. "You called me cursed," Elena continued, her voice rising. "You made me believe I was worthless, unlovable, ashamed to our bloodline, but I was never the curse, sisters. You were." Serafina lunged. She'd always been the warrior twin, quick and deadly, and she moved now with desperate speed. A hidden blade flashed in her hand as she hurled herself at Elena, one final attempt to silence the truth. She never made contact. The Grand Hall's doors exploded inward with a concussive boom that knocked wolves off their feet. Alpha Darius stormed through the smoke, flanked by berserkers, wolves driven mad by the Shadowfang curse, foam flecking their muzzles, eyes rolling with insanity. "She was promised to me," Darius roared, his own eyes wild with encroaching madness. "The curse must be broken. I will not die a lunatic." Chaos erupted instantly. Berserkers attacked indiscriminately, their curse-addled minds recognizing only enemies. Tony shifted mid-stride, his massive, dark wolf form tearing through attackers as he fought to reach Elena. Guards clashed with the invaders, blood spraying across marble floors. Elena watched her mate get swarmed. 3 berserkers tackled him simultaneously, claws raking his flanks, teeth tearing at his throat. Tony fought back savagely, but he was outnumbered, overwhelmed, blood, his blood, streaming from wounds that kept multiplying. Something inside Elena shattered, not broke, shattered. Every wall she'd built, every cage she'd constructed around her power, every lie she'd told herself about being weak and worthless exploded into dust. Lyra surged forward with a triumphant howl. Yes, now, become. The shift took her like lightning. Her bones didn't crack so much as sing, reforming with agonizing joy. Silver fur erupted across her skin, flowing like liquid moonlight. Her senses expanded exponentially. She could smell every drop of blood in the hall, hear every heartbeat, feel the moon's pull like a lover's embrace. When she opened her eyes, she stood on 4 powerful legs, larger than any female wolf in recorded history. Her fur glowed ethereally, silver white and impossibly luminous. Across her coat, tribal markings blazed like white fire, ancient symbols of the moon goddess herself. The hall went silent. Even the berserkers stopped, some primal instinct recognizing what stood before them. Wolves dropped to their knees involuntarily, compelled by power older than pack law, older than civilization. The Luna Reborn had finally awakened, and she was magnificent. Helena threw back her head and howled. The sound that erupted from her throat was nothing like an ordinary wolf's cry. It was moonlight given voice, divinity made audible, a shockwave of pure lunar energy that radiated outward in visible ripples of silver light. The howl crashed over the berserkers like a tidal wave, and one by one they collapsed. Not dead, cleansed. The madness that had twisted their minds for generations simply dissolved. Wolves who had been frothing, violent, monsters moments before lay still on the marble floor, breathing peacefully, their eyes clear for the first time in years. Some were weeping. Others were laughing with disbelieving joy. Elena didn't pause to marvel at what she'd done. Tony was still bleeding. She moved like liquid silver, flowing across the grand hall with supernatural grace. The wolves in her path parted instinctively, unable to resist the commanding presence of the Luna Reborn. She reached her mate in seconds, placing her massive silver form between him and the remaining attackers. Tony struggled to rise, his dark wolf form battered and bleeding but still fighting. Together, Elena felt through the bond. We do this together. She understood. They moved as one, his battle-hardened ferocity complementing her divine grace in a dance of destruction that left their enemies broken in their wake. Where Tony was shadow, Elena was light. Where he struck with brutal efficiency, she flowed around attacks like water. The prophecy had spoken of this, warrior and Luna, darkness and light, united against those who would tear the world apart. Within minutes, it was over. Alpha Darius knelt in the center of the carnage, his berserkers incapacitated, his invasion shattered. But Elena didn't see a monster when she looked at him now. She saw a man who had spent his entire life fighting an enemy that lived inside his own skull, watching his father and grandfather descend into madness, knowing the same fate awaited him. She saw herself, in a way. Someone who had been told they were cursed, who had believed the lies until the truth finally broke through. Elena padded toward him, her silver form towering over his kneeling body. The madness was visible in his eyes, scratching at the edges, waiting to consume him. He had days left, maybe hours, before he became what he feared most. "Mercy," Lyra whispered. "He tried to kill us, but he was dying too, just slower." Elena pressed her muzzle to Darius's forehead. Silver light poured from the point of contact, flooding through him like sunrise burning away fog. He screamed, not in pain, but in release, decades of building madness ripping free from his consciousness. The curse that had plagued his bloodline for generations, the dark inheritance that had driven alphas to slaughter their own packs, shattered like glass beneath the Luna's power. When it was done, Darius collapsed forward, pressing his throat to the floor in the deepest submission a wolf could offer. "Luna Reborn," he gasped. "Forgive me. I beg you, forgive me." Elena shifted back to human form, Tony's cloak appearing around her shoulders instantly. He'd retrieved it even while wounded, always thinking of her. She stood over the broken Alpha, considering. "You're forgiven," she said finally. "But you will spend the rest of your life earning that forgiveness. Your pack will join the Alliance. Your resources will help rebuild what war has destroyed. And if you ever threaten an innocent life again, I won't be merciful twice." Darius nodded frantically, tears streaming down his weathered face. Elena turned to face her sisters. The royal guards had captured them during the chaos, and they knelt now in chains, their elegant mourning clothes torn and disheveled. Morgana was sobbing. Serafina stared at the floor, all fight drained from her posture. "Please," Morgana begged, "we're family. Blood is everything." "You sold your blood to be slaughtered," Elena interrupted, her voice cold and steady. "You poisoned your family for 17 years. You don't get to invoke blood now." She circled them slowly, letting them feel the weight of her attention. "I could execute you. The law would support it. Tony certainly wants to. She felt her mate's fierce agreement through the bond. But that would make me the darkness you always accused me of being. Elena stopped in front of Morgana, tilting her sister's chin up to meet her eyes. You're sentenced to serve in the refugee camps on the border. You'll care for the war orphans, the outcasts, the wolves that packs like ours, discarded as worthless. You'll rebuild what your greed destroyed, one life at a time. She reached down and ripped the thornwood crest from Morgana's collar, then Serafina's. The Luna belongs to no family but the moon herself. I am not your sister, I never was. The guards dragged them away. Morgana's sobs echoed through the hall until the doors closed behind her. 1 year later, the Blood Moon Festival had been transformed. Where once wolves had gathered to witness sacrifice and bloodshed, they now celebrated unity and hope. Starfall Palace blazed with lights, its courtyards filled with representatives from every pack in the kingdom, including Shadowfang, whose new Alpha Council governed in cooperation with the Crown. Elena stood on the royal balcony, silver armor gleaming beneath the crimson moon. Beside her, Tony wore matching regalia, his battle scars displayed proudly rather than hidden. The kingdom stretched before them, slowly healing from generations of war and hatred. Any regrets, my queen? Tony's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Elena leaned into his warmth, feeling their bond pulse with contentment. Only that it took so long to find you. He traced the silver crescent mark on her shoulder, the divine symbol that had changed everything. The council is asking about heirs. She turned in his arms, meeting his eyes with a smile that held both love and mischief. Let them ask. We have a kingdom to rebuild first. She kissed him softly. Then, maybe. Below them, wolves howled in celebration. Shadowfang and Thornwood, former enemies and lifelong rivals, raising their voices together for the first time in 3 generations. The sound washed over Elena like a blessing, like validation, like proof that everything she'd suffered had led somewhere meaningful. They had called her cursed. They had sold her to death. But Elena Gardner, Luna, reborn and queen of the wolf kingdoms, had transformed betrayal into destiny. Standing beside her battle-scarred mate, watching their united packs celebrate beneath the blood moon, she finally understood the truth that had eluded her for 22 years. She was never broken, she was being forged, and now she would forge a new world. And that's the end of Elena's story, from Cursed Omega to Luna Queen, from betrayed sister to the wolf who changed everything. I really hope this story hit you the way it hit me. If it did, leave a comment. Tell me your favorite part. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and this community genuinely means so much to me. Now, the important question. Do you want another story like this? Because I've got one ready. Same energy, same drama, maybe even more betrayal. Follow so you don't miss it. New story drops next week. Thank you for watching, wolves. Until next time.